Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that is hopefully for somebody.
My name is Kyle Naranya, and as you've heard already, I am joined by my lovely children,
Melody Naranya
and
Sawyer Naranya.
And on this week's episode of the podcast, we will be reviewing Zootopia 2. It will just be me for non-spoilers, because as much as my kids love movies, sometimes it's hard to keep the spoilers to themselves. So non-spoilers will just be me, and then my two lovely children will be joining for the spoiler discussion. No need to worry, time codes will be listed in the description. And before I forget, happy Thanksgiving to my American listeners who are hopefully enjoying this, as well as football, turkey, and whatever you happen to be eating. Let's jump into Zootopia 2 non-spoilers.
Welcome to Partners in Crisis. I'm your therapy animal, Dr. Fuzzbee. Greg, we talked about that. What are we making Merlin? Uncomfortable. Yes. And we have two new partners. Can you tell us about your journey to Dysfunction Junction?
Well,
Zootopia 2 is one of those Disney sequels that I didn't really think you could justify its existence. It was greenlit post the launch of Disney Plus when it was established that a lot of the films they were going to be making, specifically in the animated genre, were going to be sequels because those are known successful properties. The first Zootopia made made over $1 billion, and it's exciting to see this avenue within Disney's animated films to have a sort of buddy cop film in that genre that if you grew up in the 80s and the 90s, there were so many films within that genre, and yeah, there's typically a next case. What I was most nervous about going into this, was this just going to feel like more Zootopia? And thankfully it doesn't. The movie focuses on the relationship between Wild and Hops as police officers and as friends. It's something that is established obviously in the first film, but those two relationships are developed in front of us on screen, and they ultimately wind solving a case. Zootopia 2 can't just be more. And thankfully it's not. It's funny though that because this is another buddy cop film, there is a structure to how these films typically go. There is a next case, but the case has to do more than just show us, look, here's something else happening in Zootopia. The movie functions by introducing new characters, new worlds, and gives us an avenue into the history, specifically what it's like with reptiles. If you are a keen observer of the previous film, you didn't see any reptiles. It was entirely mammal-based, and it's really interesting to see what the dichotomy is and how the relationship to snakes in general, and as somebody who is terrified of them, I do blame Indiana Jones for that fear of River Phoenix falling into the container of them in The Last Crusade, and I've been terrified of them ever since. The only reason this worked for me was that it was voiced by Ke Huy Quan. The back and forth between Jennifer Goodwin, or Jennifer, I actually don't know how to pronounce that, apologies to her, and Jason Bateman is just as fun. You get an absolute separation in personality, and they're so distinct, and their relationship is the thing that you want to track. You want to see how it's developed. Nick is now a cop. He was a hustler, a con man in the first movie, and in this one, he's on the right side of the law. But it's fascinating to see how his approach to justice and Judy's are so different. And their butting heads only allows for those characters to ultimately become closer because of this experience that they go on. One of the things that I appreciate most about this being a sequel, and in nearly a decade, is with the visual effects. They're obviously more refined, but there's a key look to how these movies are represented. And at the same time, you get to see an expansive world, the details are cooler, and in a good way when something like Die Hard, as an example, we get a sequel, there's a lot of familiarity with it, but things are grander and on a bigger scale. Quite literally, there are blockbuster-style sequences in this, and when you have an action film wrapped up in a kid's movie, you do have to do those things. You get a wide variety of ages going to see this. I took my two kids, who I know people are anticipating their opinions in full spoilers, so don't worry, I'm not going to waste much more of your time. At least I hope I'm not. And I really like the movie. I think it really establishes why this is a world worth investing in. They created such an illustrious one in the beginning, and overall, it's just a world that's worth exploring. I think what would be compelling more than anything is we get new characters in this, and their back and forth is different. But one of the things I really would have loved to have seen is how characters that we established in the first film outside of Judy and Nick, how have those relationships evolved? Because outside of Nick and Judy, there are cameos, and those are meaningful because it keeps us framed in the world we have explored already. But there are certain characters who were kind of pushed to the side for the sake of plot convenience. That did bum me out a little bit, and I can expand on that more in spoilers once the kids jump back on. But I like this world. It is cool to see something that Disney really did popularize. This did exist beforehand, but the anthropomorphization of animals and getting to see a world where they all exist together is cool. I like that there is this avenue within something that so many Gen Xers and millennials grew up on, buddy comedies and cop films. And yes, I can understand if there are people maybe who saw the first one, and then definitely things have shifted dramatically in people's receptions to fictionalized police officers. But ultimately, the movie focuses on the two opinions of our lead characters and how they feel about what it means to do the right thing. And that exploration, I think, is meaningful, especially in an era where kids don't necessarily know what is the right thing. There's so many different things, and it's interesting that this movie uses its opportunity to talk about power, how that is used, how people are in power, and for all of those things to be involved in a kids movie. And I don't use that to be derogatory. I absolutely adore well-made kids films, and I loved experiencing this. It was fun to take the family. This is definitely one of those movies where there are some really deep-cut references that if you're just a film fan or pop culture fan, you'll really enjoy. I had a great time with this, and I think there is plenty to explore if they continually want to make these. Now, again, I know people don't want just sequels, but in the newer Disney era, this is one of those franchises that I do think has legs for more. If you're interested in what I think about this 21st century CGI Disney era, make sure you're following me on /filmreelist on social media, because I'm going to be releasing my top 5 favorite CG animated Disney films on Thursday. If you're listening to this on release, that's tomorrow. If you're listening to this later, that video should be out already. Now, I've talked about this movie nonstop with no spoilers. Now let's bring my kids in for the full spoiler discussion. You have been warned.
Snakes aren't the bad guys. I have to set things right. And when I do, my family will finally be able to come home.
Okay, so all the non-spoilers are out of the way. Now, we saw this before it was out for the general public. Melody, what were some of your favorite parts with Zootopia 2?
I liked when they added some new officers because the zebras are funny and all of the new elements of the new officers. They all have different personalities.
And they don't seem to really like any of the characters we know from the previous one, right? So we have a group of warthogs, we have a group of zebras, and the hippos, I believe, are the only officers that were in Zootopia in the first one. I think that dynamic is really entertaining because you have people that you don't like, and you want Judy and Nick to ultimately be able to do what they do, which is they find the person really behind the crime. Now, before we get into what the whole mystery is, Sawyer, what was your favorite part of the movie?
I liked when the fox joked about, I don't think there is enough guards for the book that the snakes were trying to steal.
So that's a great part of the movie, which is the mystery involved in Zootopia 2 is we see different regions, but Tundra Town is going to be expanded by the lynxes. And there's a book that has the history of Zootopia. I do think that was one of my favorite parts, which is we get to see more of Zootopia 2's history. And it turns out that the lynxes were lying the whole time. And we find out that the reptiles actually did belong to be in Zootopia. What did you think about them using a snake, Melody, as the person who was trying to do good? Because how do you normally think of snakes?
Snakes are like predators, the ones who kill most of the animals. I thought the snake was going to kill Judy because snakes eat rabbits.
That's a really good point. And it's another comparison that I like that we get in Zootopia 2, which is in the first movie, rabbits are prey of foxes, and you have the back and forth with predator and prey in the first one. And then in this one, we're looking at a whole different section of the animal kingdom. We didn't have any reptiles in Zootopia 1, and the focus on them in Zootopia 2 I thought was really interesting, and I thought it was quite funny. Sawyer, what did you think about seeing the marsh environment with all of the sea lions and the hippos and getting to see the hidden reptile village?
I thought there was a lot of snow, and I thought it was a little interesting about them turning on the power for the snake village.
Oh, so yeah, that's a really good point. As you can probably hear from this, we're all sharing one microphone. I do think that's really interesting because we learn that reptiles lived in Zootopia and that they were a part of the history, because what do we know about Zootopia's weather patterns, Melody?
There's sunny, there's rainy, and there's like snowy and all kinds of weather for all the animals to live so they can all get their own weather.
Well, and what would you call that? What's special about where specific animals live? What's that H word?
They all have different habitats.
Yeah, and I like that they use the weather in the film to talk about how different animals live. And to get parts of this movie where we're learning more about Zootopia, but I do think one of the things that some people might have a problem with, and we talked about this, it does feel like the adventure, at least the structure, is kind of the same.
Yeah. I mean, how all the structures are different, and they're very futuristic. All the tubes and the transportation is insane.
Well, and we get to see the limits of mammals, because all of Zootopia up until this point is just mammals.
Yeah.
There's different mammals, but there's predators and there's prey. But when they're chasing Gary, the snake, his last name is the snake, fantastically voiced by Ke Huy Quan, who I absolutely adore. And he was actually also in Kung Fu Panda 4. But in this movie, we get to see what happens when mammals are traveling with aquatic animals. And I really like that the movie shows that the main problem between Nick and Judy is Nick's not really standing up for himself, is he?
No.
So who's in charge of this partnership?
Basically, it's Judy. She cares about the partnership between them, and then when they get the book, Nick's not doing anything. He's just eating, watching TV, not even working on the book, and Judy actually cares about it.
Well, one of the things that this movie really does test is their friendship and their love for each other and their partnership. Yeah. So you would describe it's a metaphor for their relationship. And it's funny to me that one of the main threads that continues from the last movie is, one, Judy was a prey as a police officer. And then we have this relationship between the two of them. They became famous because they stopped the deputy mayor who was not poisoning, but she was using chemicals, Nightshade, to make all the predators act more primal, which I thought was really interesting that we haven't had a lot of time. I thought maybe before going to see the movie that they had been partners for longer, but they've only been partners for about 1 week. And even the police chief, who does like Judy, his life is put at risk because of what they're trying to do. Because as much as Judy is a good police officer, sometimes she does wrong things. And what happens to the police captain?
He gets bitten by a venomous snake, Gary the snake, and then everyone thinks he's dead because he got it in his head, and everyone thought he was dead because of brain damage.
Well, and this thing about the movie with using snakes as the quote-unquote villain, when they're not, Gary is a good guy, is that poison would be something that characters, or venom, people would have to worry about. And I liked that they do find a way of making it so the police chief can't protect Nick and Judy from the lynxes, who are a really bad family, right? They have taken over this idea that they are the originators or inventors of the weather wall. And who do we find out actually invented that?
The reptiles.
Specifically who?
Gary's great-grandma, when the lynxes stole the book, the main lynx ripped out the page and then said that he made the book because he stole all her plans of the weather wall.
And Sawyer, you brought this up earlier, is how did they discover where the snakes and the reptiles actually lived? Because I know it was one of your favorite parts.
They lived in a place that was really snowy. So, like, one of the people in Zootopia, they covered the whole snake island in snow. So, and they turned off the power, so the snakes couldn't get the Gary's grandma's secrets. So, and he also turned off the power so they couldn't find the Gary's grandma's house.
So how did they find out where Gary's grandma lived?
They went to Snake Island and they went over to the powerhouse and they went into the power room and they turned on the power and turned on the clock tower.
And then, so the clock tower, what did it do for everybody?
It made light so they could see near the house.
And I think that was maybe, at least watching the movie with the two of you, maybe the most scary scene of the movie, which is we've spent most of it at least thinking that Gary is at least not going to hurt people that we know. And then ultimately, so I wasn't surprised by this. We mentioned this at dinner. We went to dinner after seeing the film, that when they introduced the brother of the Lynx family, that Pa Bert, I had a thought that he was always going to be a bad guy. Because in the last movie, and we actually see her, the sheep deputy mayor, we see her, she gets a cameo, that brother was going to wind up being one of the bad guys. And it does turn out to be the case. And Sawyer, I know you didn't like this. What does he do to Judy?
He, tries to bite her, I think.
Well, what does he inject her into her? Remember?
He injects, a tiny pen. Venom poisoned. And, if Gary actually, accidentally bites Judy, he has, a tiny pen that can stab her in the heart and make her alive again.
Yeah, that's right. So Gary travels with his own antidote, which I did think was a little bit funny. And the pen does say, stab me in the heart and you'll be fine. And there's a lot of tension there because at this point in the movie, Judy and Nick, they're not really working together, but it is only when Nick sees that Judy could die that he realizes being a hero and doing the right thing is ultimately worth risking your life for. And I thought that was really quite compelling, Melody, when he's fighting on the side of the ice trying to get the antidote to Judy. What did you think about that?
I thought it was chaotic because they were both trying to get the antidote. One trying to, make the antidote not exist, but one trying to save someone. They're the exact opposite person. Trying to do something, one to help and one to, make the world even worse than it is.
Well, and that's a big plot point of the movie, which is the reason the Linksley family doesn't want the book to be found is it contains the secret location for what Sawyer talked about, that the reptile village hidden within Tundra Town. And I found it interesting that Tundra Town wound up being the place we visited most because, as we know, reptiles are cold-blooded animals. So it would make more sense for that location to actually be somewhere warm. But we don't really, outside of the main Zootopia metropolis, the big city, we visit Tundra Town and we visit the new marsh area, but we don't get to the jungle. The jungle was a main location in the last one with the jaguar. So I thought that was really interesting. One thing I wished we got to spend more time with was the reptiles, because they're in that one sunken down boat. And I thought it was really fascinating to see an entire species completely hidden from the other Zootopia public? And what was something you thought was really funny when we had the great big sea lions and the walruses?
I thought it was funny how, like, the juggling walrus thing was like, he wanted no change, but he only wanted fish. And the beaver said it's a choking hazard for change. And he only wanted fish because that's what he could eat. And I liked the hi Bob, and they did this kind of anniversary thing on the boat, like, aka swimming walrus. And it was like, is it your anniversary? And then he just turned on some lights and started playing music.
Yeah, which was really funny. It was the music from Lady and the Tramp. And that's a perfect segue melody, which I really appreciate. High five. Is we haven't talked about it yet. So we have the Lynxes as the new family. We have Gary the Snake. And then we had Nibbles Maplestick, who is a podcaster or a YouTuber who believes in conspiracy theories. So the conspiracy theory is that reptiles have always been a part of the history of Zootopia. And I thought it was funny to kind of have that character tag along. And there's definitely a moment in the movie where it leads us to believe that she's gone bad and she actually locked Nick out of the weather wall where they're going to turn on the power, which I thought was really interesting. One thing that didn't work for me was the dad of all the lynxes, I believe his name, Milton, is concerned with them being discovered. And it turns out he's so powerful and rich that he even put in the new mayor. And I'm curious if you guys noticed this. Did the new horse mayor remind you of anybody from a different Disney movie?
He reminded me of the horse in Rapunzel.
Oh, of Maximus? I think that's a really great comparison. So he's voiced by, I lost it here for a minute. It is, where is it? Patrick Warburton, who's the voice of Krunk from Emperor's New Groove. And I thought those characters were very similar, and I thought that was very funny to have somebody who was a celebrity, and this has happened in real life before, where actors wind up getting involved in politics, and it's only after he sees that bad things are going to go wrong that he actually stands up for himself and he defeats the other lynxes. Sawyer, is there any other final thoughts you have about the movie?
So the Judy and the fox were trying to help the snakes try to be nice, and and Judy was trying to help the snakes try to be nice.
Yeah.
And the snakes were trying to be nice, and Judy was helping that she would have to be had proof of that the snakes were trying to be nice and wasn't trying to bite people.
Yes, so she was trying to show everybody that the snakes were not the reason that the tortoise died, but that they were the architects and inventors of the weather wall. Thank you so much to the both of you for jumping in for spoilers. I think this was fun, and we talked about our favorite parts of the movie. So the last thing I want to ask before I let you two go is, do you think it was too much like Zootopia 1? And if you don't, do you think people should spend their U.S. Thanksgiving going to see this?
I think they should spend their U.S. Thanksgiving going to this.
Yeah, okay. And Sawyer, do you think this movie's worth going to see in the theater?
Yes, and also it was like a very good movie, and it's also really funny.
Yeah, I think it's got everything for adults. If you're one of those adults who doesn't typically go to see family-oriented films by yourself, I think you're going to have a really good time. There are some amazing deep cuts just in terms of film history. And as a Canadian, I love seeing Peter Mansbridge back as Peter Moosebridge. That was really funny. Thanks so much for joining me for this, kids. I hope you enjoyed this special U.S. Thanksgiving episode of the podcast. If you haven't yet, check out my Wicked for Good review. It's available on all podcasts thread. This week's question of the week is, what is your favorite Netflix series? To answer, you can comment below on YouTube and Spotify. You can also email the podcast, filmreelistspod@gmail.com. And if you haven't, please subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. And YouTube, I know that might be asking too much, but I'm really hoping to hit 500 subscribers before the year is out. That would be the first step in monetization, which would be amazing and allow me to do some new and fun opportunities for the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to my kids for joining me. That was super fun. Leave a comment below if you thought they were great reviewers. I'm sure they would love to hear that. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I will see you next time.